Welcome, welcome. Thank you for joining me for the first of our series on building belonging. My name is Katrina Gamble. I am the CEO of Sojourn Strategies, a social impact consulting firm that supports organizations and brands to move research and campaigns and their dollars in ways that moves us towards the world in which we vision for ourselves, our families, and our communities. I am really excited to launch this series on building belonging. The reason why I wanted to host this is that we are in a moment where there is an immense amount of chaos. People are feeling isolated, increased polarization. Every day, there's news about things that are impacting our organizations, our communities, real threats to many people who we care about and love. And as leaders in this moment, we have to figure out a way to create community, build belonging, and figure out ways in which we can take action and remain hopeful and take care of ourselves. So, I am hosting this series where I'm going to be having conversations with brilliant strategists and leaders who from different sectors and industries about how they are navigating this moment, and hopefully there'll be lessons that we can take from that into our own work, businesses, brands, and organizations. And so today, I'm really excited that we're going to be launching this series with my dear friend, Chris Melody Fills Figueredo. She is a brilliant strategist and leader who always leads with love. And so I'm excited to have her join us and share about how she is leading in this moment and the work that she's leading at the Ballot Initiative Strategy Center. Welcome, Chris.
Thank you for having me, Katrina. I'm so excited about this conversation. It's really important given the moment that we are in.
Yes. So, Chris, I introduced you really briefly. You are the executive director of BISC for short, the Ballot Initiative Strategy Center. But I wanted you to just share a little bit more with folks who are on about who you are and also tell us a bit about what's your why? Why are you
Hmm.
doing the work that you're doing in this moment?
Thanks for that question. It's important. So, my day job is the executive director of BIS, the Ballot Initiative Strategy Center, which is a movement building infrastructure organization. The way I think about us, we serve the field. We are supporting our partners in the states at the national level to sort of be this bridge to turn their dreams about what they want for their communities into a reality by putting these initiatives onto the ballot to voters directly. I often say, ballot measures should be love letters to our people. My That's my day job. I come to this work. I'm a working class kid. I'm an immigrant. I often describe myself as ni de aquí ni de allá, neither from here or there. I have one foot in my home country of Venezuela and another foot here in the United States where I grew up, and I've always just sort of thought of myself as someone am in between worlds. And so this question around belonging is something that is really resonant with me. But I am a mom too. I'm a daughter. I am a visionary. I'm a dreamer. And my why, I think where it started from is, as a woman of color, as a queer person, as a person, who knows what it is to struggle, and to survive. My why has always been to build the world that we deserve. Um, and that word deserve is really, I think, really important. It's not the world that we live in yet, but it's so
Mm.
very, very possible. And I want people like me, people like you, to feel like they see themselves reflected or are part of the design of this world. And then as I've grown up, and especially as becoming a mom, my why is to build a world worthy of Olivia.
Mm.
She's the most brilliant Black girl, in my opinion. You know her. I think that's right. She is, to me, the embodiment of light and joy. And I want to build a world that is worthy of her, where she doesn't feel like she has to question her worth, that we have designed it in a way that she knows without question that she belongs.
I love that. That's so beautiful. And yes, Olivia is a brilliant, beautiful young woman and amazing dancer. And I really appreciate you naming and bringing in to this space like the people, like why are we here? Like not it's not just about issues or this or that. When we think about the work that we're doing, it's really about, like you said, like how are we building a world that is reflective of what we deserve and like the people that we love and that we are in community with. And I just think that's so incredibly important. So I wanted to ask you this question about belonging. You know, we have spent the last couple of years at Sojourn doing research on this idea of civic homes, which is like spaces where people can come together and where they have shared values and take action. And in having conversations with community members literally across the country, what we found was that what was foundational of like what brought people into community spaces to work together was this idea of belonging. People having a deep sense of belonging of like where they wanted to be. And when I say that word, I know sometimes it can sound a little vague, like what is
Mhm.
this belonging? Like what does it look like? But it's one of those ideas that I think once you know it when you
Mhm.
experience it. And so I wanted to just start the conversation by asking you, um, just so that we can kind of make it a little bit more tangible for folks, like
Mhm.
moment where you felt a sense of belonging, and what was it about that moment that made you feel like you belonged?
Yeah, I mean, it's such a for me, and I think you understand this is like as people who identify as women who are queer, um, who are people of color, and our experiences are being women of color are vastly different, right? Um, you know, I go back to this like ni de aquí ni de allá. Like I actually for a good chunk of my life, I didn't feel like I belonged.
Hmm.
Um, I was never white enough to be white or brown enough to be brown, or I spoke another language, or I'm a working class kid. My mom cleaned houses for, people that I went to school with. And so like I always struggled with this sense of belonging. And I think one specific moment that is actually more recent, and I'm going to share two examples um, of where I felt like I didn't have to code switch. I didn't have to
Mm,
pretend. I didn't have to be what someone else expected of me. And it was really important for me when I took this job as executive director of BISC to fully own all of my intricacies, like all of my identities, all of the pieces of me without question, and feel like I could be vulnerable and myself. For me, I did that from the jump, and it was very clear in my interview process as I started the role that like I want to feel like I belong. And so, because I want that for everyone else. And so, like, for me,
mhm.
that sort of moment in which I like stepped into this role and just sort of fully embodied, we both have Audre Lorde in behind us. And,
Yes.
when I started the job, there's this Audre Lorde quote, when I dare to, I'm going to butcher it, but essentially, when I dare to dream, it doesn't matter the risk I take, right? Like that's the core of it. I can't believe I don't have it memorized, but that has been so important to me. And the other memory I'll share is, we have a large national conference. It's happening at the end of April, called Road Ahead. And it was really important for me to create a space where folks of color, especially organizers, grassroots folks, felt like that was their space. And I remember Emily's Persuade Zamora, who's the executive director of Silver State Voices, um, came up to me after the first Road Ahead, and she's like, I felt like I belonged in this space. And
Mm,
I had so many folks of color say, like, I struggled with coming here or other times, but I felt seen and heard, and I felt like I could be my full authentic self in this space. And to me, like that is so at core to belonging, and that you can see others that share a similar experience or idea or values as you described it, and you can move together.
Yes. Yes, I love that. And so it's so true. Like when we feel this sense of belonging, it is about exactly what you said. It's about being seen, being heard. This idea of feeling safe, like you can show up fully unapologetically as yourself and like move in a space. And I'm so grateful for you and the spaces that you've created at BISC. We need more spaces like that where people can show up fully as themselves. I remember I was like, actually, when we were doing some of the research around this, and I was asking someone to describe a moment where they felt a sense of belonging, and they described a sense where they didn't feel belonging, and they were like, the way they talked about it was like, I don't feel like a cat with my back arched. I could just like come into the space, relax, feeling safe. And that's like so important. I was reading a study from the US Surgeon General from a few years ago. And it was a whole study about how we're basically in an isolation. We're in a loneliness epidemic in the US just because people are so isolated, um, feeling deeply disconnected from community. And I'm a strong believer that community is a way in which we solve for a lot of problems, like creating spaces
100%.
of community and connection. And I'm just like curious if you can share a little bit about how you are creating spaces of community within your organization or with the partners in which you work with at BISC out in the world in a moment where people are feeling
Mhm.
really anxious and scared, but also wanting to take action and find spaces of community.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you, Katrina. Like, community is part of the way out of the moment that we are in, and we have felt so isolated and in that sense of loneliness, especially. I think it sort of came to a head during COVID for all of us, but it actually was happening way before that. But we all sort of had this collective time of feeling
Mm,
alone and isolated, where I think it opened much more widely, um, this sort of disconnectedness that we have across, not just in the United States, not just in our home, in our where we live, but across the world. And I just have to be honest, that has been at the core of how I have always done this work. I also consider myself a coalition builder. And I've led
building
large scale.
coalitions is one of the hardest things
It's
in the world to
incredibly
do.
hard. Coming to, like, an agreement or alignment around with people who have vastly different ideas on strategy and tactics. But I always feel like it's important to understand, like, to what end is a question I ask, and if we are clear about, like, the ultimate end goal, how we get there might differ, but we have to be very clear about that why, and where we're going. And so that's really been at the core of my work, for a good time. Even I think about, like, things I've growing up as a kid, and things that I did in college, like sort of this in, important feeling where I felt when someone had been wronged, I felt so very strongly that there was something that we had to do to organize to feel to help people feel whole. So that has been very center at my leadership at BISC, and really this question around how ballot measures provide us an opportunity to actually have more agency and self-determination of the outcome of something that impacts our lives, and really centering and giving that power to the people that are going to be the most impacted by that policy outcome. Like, policy is, yes, what we want out of a ballot measure, whether it's raising the minimum wage or restoring voting rights to returning citizens. But if the people who are at the core of what we are trying to build are not centered and driving that change, and feel like they belong and feel like they are seen and heard, then we're actually doing it wrong. And that has been, I think, at the core of every strategy, or the way we operate at BISC is, is not assuming that we have an expertise, yes, but the experts are our state partners, are the leaders. Someone who we've both worked with, Desmond Meade, from Florida Rights Restoration. He led and drove, as well as other returning citizens, that 2018 ballot measure restoring voting rights to returning citizens. It's so fundamentally important, and it's how we at BIS think about the way we convene spaces, the types of coalitions we are a part of. Sometimes we're that neutral convener to help people who may have had some friction or not felt like they belonged in a coalitional aspect. I think that's just really critical. The people we serve, and ensuring that our partners and in the communities that we serve, especially those who have been marginalized or left out of decision making, or rooms of power, are feel like they are empowered and belong.
Yes. I love that you said that ballot initiatives and the work that you all do with partners is a way in which people can experience agency and understand their power. Because that's the other thing too, is like, we know that there's just this growing segment of people who feel no agency, they feel disconnected, they feel hopeless, within our government right now, like whether or not people, whether or not they can actually make a difference. And so when you were saying that creating community is fundamental to the way in which you all do the work at BISC, for someone who is listening to that, is doing this work and trying to think about, like, what are some specific things that you all do when you go into a state or begin to work with partners to establish community and build real relationships? Like, if you were giving someone advice of, like, you have to make sure you do these things, are there specific things that you all really focus in on when you're trying to create community and help people understand their own agency in the work that they're engaging in?
Well, I think number one, we have to be invited in. We are not making an assumption that, yes, like this, our job is to help people run ballot measures, right? Whether it's research, whether it's training, whether it's like tactical skills to development that people need to develop. But we don't make an assumption that we know more, but that there is something that we can gain and learn from our state partners, especially. And so, for us, it's important to be invited in, to, treat people as equals, to, create community agreements, or just learn about each other. To me, learning about each other as people first, and getting to the work later, and building that trust. We can only move at the speed of trust. That, I think, is so fundamentally important. Having conversations with folks, listening, learning, sharing, I think is really important. And then getting feedback, and anytime we do a program, our training program, or we do, create cohorts or convening spaces, we want to co-create that with our partners. We maybe have a foundation, but we want to make sure that we're co-creating whatever that agenda or that space looks like, together, because I think that creates that sense of belonging, right? We have all a stake in the outcome of this. It's the way we've been thinking about the governance structure of some of these ballot measures, right? For so long, ballot measures, they are a lot of money, right? And for a long time, sort of the governance, or sort of the decision makers, one of the, how you got onto that committee was based on how much money you threw in. And we have talked about with our partners of your field program, the amount of volunteers, there are other ways to have a stake in the success of something. That should also be something that is of high value, in order to be a leader and help make with this decision making of the sort of governance of at ballot measures. But I think it always starts with, being invited in, having conversations, listening, and then I think the final thing that is just co-creating whatever
Mm-hmm.
your strategy that you're doing, and then having the opportunity for feedback and reflection.
I love that. I love that you said the first thing, one of the first things you do is actually get to know people as human beings. It's such a important reminder in this moment, in any kind of workspace or any space where it's like we're all showing up to do work or to move actions within organizations, but we are whole humans that extend beyond
Mhm.
whatever hours that we're there, and that it's so valuable to actually be grounded in that and in being invited in. I love that you said
Mhm.
that. And moving at the speed of trust, which is so important. And I know that oftentimes people think that in my mind, I think actually taking the time to build relationships, get to know people, building that deep level of trust, it's like go slow to move fast instead of trying to jump
Mhm.
over some of those foundational things to just try to get people to do things. And so you were talking about ballot initiatives. And so because this is on LinkedIn Live, there may be people who aren't all the way understanding this. But like you said, ballot initiatives are tools of direct democracy where
Mhm.
things are put on the ballot, where the people have the power to change their communities. And honestly, over the last few years, ballot initiatives have been where some of the most significant wins on a lot of really important issues have happened. So and if folks have questions, feel free to drop questions in the comments for folks who are joining us live. Thanks for being here. But before we move to the questions, and my last question for you, I wanted to ask you if you could share some of what you would say were some of the top like major wins that communities drove through
Mhm.
putting
Mhm.
things on the ballot and moving a tool of direct democracy.
Yeah. So I'll take a step back, making an assumption not everybody knows about ballot measures. I grew up in Texas. I'm like, what's a ballot measure? I don't know. We don't have them at least at the statewide level.
Mhm.
But at its core is, citizens go into their community with petitions and put a particular issue on a ballot. Um, and, not every state has that citizen led process where it is driven by the people who, in my opinion, are the fourth unnamed branch of our government, is
Mhm.
actually the people. Um, they work together, and often in coalition, which is another thing I love about ballot measures, to drive an issue to victory or defeat, right?
Mhm.
And so, half of the country plus DC have this citizen led process. All states at some level, probably at the municipal or county level, have some form of a citizen led process. And then there may be, yesterday there were elections in Wisconsin. Your state legislature can also put issues onto the ballot as well. So at
Mhm.
its core, it's something um, that we as people have the ability to put an issue that we want to make change in our community. And really, for the last decade, because of how hyper partisan, because of gerrymandering, because of the way our systems of government have been created, um, and really in many ways blocking people from being a part of our democracy, it has become a necessary tool for state leaders and advocates to put issues that are actually popular regardless of party affiliation onto the ballot and make change.
Mhm.
So I can think about, in 2016, Lucha, the a Living United for Change in Arizona, another organization that I know that you've worked with over um, for the last several years, after the pain of an anti-immigrant bill that passed in their state, and the way, they built their coalitions and organize, they saw this opportunity to put minimum wage and paid sick as like something tangible and direct action to change the lives of folks, and they won that in 2016, and 4 other states did as well. I already mentioned Amendment 4 in Florida, which I think is one of the biggest um, enfranchise. It is the largest enfranchisement we've had for a set of voters in the country. I think in probably the last 30 years,
Yes.
where movement, a returning citizen restored voting rights for folks. And that was a critical turning point, and that had a reverberating effect across the country of the it opened the doors and the opportunity for other states through advocacy, whether it was state legislatures, to and change the conversation around returning citizens. I also remember sort of in the wake of the murder of George Floyd, where we had the sort of the pinnacle of the Black Lives Matter movement and a real conversation around police accountability. I think it was 19 of 20 of the municipal measures around policing passed. That, like, I think was
Wow.
another important flashpoint. And then, I would say in 2018 and 2020, we saw a number of states do Medicaid expansion. And then I think the most recent memory for a lot of folks is in the wake of the Dobbs decision, the 2022 Supreme Court decision around reproductive rights. That became another flashpoint where people turned to the ballot measure process. That same year, every ballot measure that expanding either guaranteed the right to an abortion or defeated abortion bans, they were all successful. And then that catapulted into 2023 in Ohio, and then this last year, where 7 of the ballot measures around reproductive freedom also passed. So there have been sort of these like moments in time that was also like you know happen coincided with really important conversations that were happening in community around wages or healthcare or reproductive rights. It's sort of, we've had these major flashpoints over the last couple of years, and it's been a really exciting time where I really do believe in co-governance and collaborative governance. And I think of democracy as an action. I think of it as a verb. I don't think just simply voting someone into office, my work is done. I actually feel like I have a responsibility. And so I think for a lot of people, these ballot measures have, given them a way to be more responsive, not only to their community needs, but ensuring that our representatives in government are following through on their promises.
Yes, I love that. Democracy is an action. That and it's so incredible that you shared all of these, from minimum wage to reproductive justice to expanding the franchise to folks, formerly incarcerated people, to Medicaid. So all of the issues that people are saying are so important to them now, that there are clear examples where people in community used this democracy tool to actually have an impact on things
Mhm.
that are important to them, which I love that you gave those examples, because like I said, when coming into this conversation, there is this growing sense of disillusionment and
Mhm.
disengagement among so many people, about our politics. And it's not limited to the US, as you said. This is actually
Mhm.
a global phenomenon that's happening. And so having these tangible examples where the fourth branch of government that you said, actually were engaged and able to make really transformative changes in their communities is really useful. So with that said, and if folks have questions, feel free to drop them in the comments. But Chris, one of the last questions I want to ask you is that I know oftentimes, you know, when you in this moment when you ask people how are you doing, it's like such a loaded question. There's
Mhm.
so much happening right now every day. There's like new news about like something that's happening that could potentially harm ourselves or people in our community or
Mhm.
really upending um, kind of our daily lives. And I think a lot of people are feeling anxious, concerned, but they also want to be thinking about ways to move to action. And one of the core values at Sojourn is actionable hope, which is this idea of that we hope is in my mind, like if you lose hope, then it's like you lose any sense that you can actually change things.
Mhm.
Like hopelessness leads to inaction, which just leads to stagnation. And so we always want to be grounded in hope, but we don't want to just say we're hopeful. We want to say we're hopeful and have real pathways to utilize that hope to impact change. So for you, like what do you want to leave with folks? Like how are you finding moments of actionable hope in your work
Mhm.
right now? How are you keeping your team or the folks you work with grounded in this idea of actionable hope?
So two things come to my mind. So, yesterday was a very important day for democracy.
Mm,
With the Supreme Court race in Wisconsin for Senator Burke Booker. I don't know why you said Burke. Senator Cory Booker, his marathon speech that now is the longest Senate speech ever, longer than Strom Thurmond, a known segregationist,
I know. I
and
love that he broke the record, and the like previous record was someone who was actually trying to take rights away from people.
for Black
Like,
people, and a Black
yes,
man broke that record. That is
I love.
so important, and we have to stop and pause and celebrate. We
Mm,
really have to just like in the midst of all this chaos where it can be hard to feel hopeful, sometimes we take a moment and we're like, okay, great, move on. No,
mm,
stop. Relish in that. Reflect on that and celebrate that because I think that is really actionable hope that is necessary to drive us forward. And then the other thing that's been on my mind a lot in respect to the work that BIS does, right? And I said this at a conference that we were together at right after the election last year. With ballot measures, we have been able to transcend party lines, right? With Democrats, Republicans, Independents, Libertarians, Green, whoever, right? However you identify or don't identify, right? Have been able to come together to pass really important policy and also build power in their states. And after the election, there was a lot of questions about like how could you vote to have abortion rights and then also um, vote for certain people into elected office. And one thing that I think is actionable hope is to have conversations and approach people with curiosity and
mm,
not condemnation because it is community. It is those tough conversations that we have to have with each other that are going to get us to that world that we all of us deserve. Every single one of us deserves to be able to thrive and not just survive. We all deserve to be happy and hopeful and feel safe. Like we all deserve this. And it is going to start with those conversations, those tough conversations, and approaching it with curiosity that I think is so critical for us in these coming days, weeks, and months.
I love that. That approaching it with curiosity. I love that you said that. It's such a important, I think, useful way to end this because that's something that everyone can do. Like you can have
Yes.
a conversation with someone that you're in community with, that you know, your family member, a friend, and just trying to understand um, like why, like if someone is feeling, if someone didn't show up last year because they just felt
Mm-hmm.
so hopeless or powerless, instead of, you know, condemning them of like, why didn't you do this, actually having them a conversation to understand why and how
Mm-hmm.
you could potentially shift that why into some type of action by being
Absolutely.
and being curious. So I love that. This has been incredible, Chris. Thank you for being the first
I'm an
guest
Aries.
on
I'm
our
first in the astrological year, so I love being first.
I love that. You bring in the Aries energy. On our series on building belonging, I really appreciate you joining and dropping so many gems, building at the speed of trust, being invited in, centering in community and agency and power, all kinds of wonderful tidbits. I don't know if there's any last words you want to share before we drop, but I just want to just share, tell you how grateful I am for you. So
Oh, well, thank you for the conversation. I think the last thing I want to share is we actually, what we're doing through ballot measures, it's working. We are
mm,
making real change. We're changing the material conditions of people's lives. We are taking power into our own hands. And in some states, our elected officials are not happy with that. They're trying to change the rules of the game so we don't have this ability to come together in community, in collaboration, as comrades, and I think it's really important for people to know, if you live in a state where we've been able to make this change in the last couple of years, there are people that are trying to take that away from you. And so that last bit of action also is like, let's protect the people's tool. And
yes,
that it's going to take all of us, again, to ensure that we can continue to, you know, have that agency, have that power, and change the material conditions of people's life and build that world that we deserve.
I love that. Chris, so before we close out, can you, for folks who want to actually learn more about ballot measures, how they can get engaged in it, like where can people find out more information about you and your organization, BIS? Like, what's the handles that folks should be
Yeah.
capturing off of this live?
So our website is ballot.org. Super easy. On there, you'll find the ballot measure hub. That is like a treasure trove of information that you can find out about what's happening in states across the country when it comes to ballot measures and direct democracy. And then on all the socials at Ballot Strategy, we try to keep it pretty easy for folks. That's where you can find more about what's the amazing work that our partners are doing across the country.
Thank you so much, Chris. I appreciate you, and thank you everyone who joined us for this live. Again, my name is Katrina Gamble, CEO of Sojourn Strategies, and you can find us at sojournstrategies.com and at Sojourn Strategies on Instagram. This is the start of our LinkedIn lives, and we will have another one coming up in a couple of weeks. Stay tuned to our social media and LinkedIn for announcements when that will happen and who our next guest will be. Appreciate you all. I hope you all have a beautiful rest of your day and that you found some tools and lessons here on how you can move in actionable hope in this moment.